Welcome to this episode of the Good for America podcast. I'm your host, former Congressman Bob Good from Virginia's 5th District, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Thanks for joining me today. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, to follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good, to rate the podcast, and to share it with your friends. The title of today's podcast are some things that I learned during my 4 years in Washington. So this will be a little bit lighter in terms of a little bit less on policy and the hard issues that we deal with in Washington, and more about how does it work in Washington? What are things like? During my 4 years in DC, I was often asked several questions. What is it like? Is it what you expected or like what you expected? Do you like, respect, trust, or admire anybody in Washington, or are they all corrupt? Are they all crooked? How do you stand it there? I got asked that a whole lot during my 4 years. And during my first 2 years, when a certain person was the speaker from California, I would get asked often, how do you stand her? Thankfully, that changed 2 years after I got there. So I want to share some basics about what it's like in Washington, what it's like in Congress. And I want to start with just sort of what it's like to be a member in terms of how things operate or how things run, what the schedule's like. So when you're in DC as a Congress member, you spend, in a typical month, you'll spend 2 or 3 weeks in DC and 1 or 2 weeks back home in your district. You fly in, they call it fly-in day. You fly in or drive in. For me, it was a drive, just about a 3.5-hour drive from my district, from the center of Virginia. But you fly in or drive in on a Monday, and you tend to leave, or what they call fly out day. You drive out or fly out on a Thursday, or you come in on a Tuesday and you leave on a Friday. So usually it's a 4-day week in DC. Really, it's more like a 3-day week, because the first day there's a standing first votes at 6:30 that evening. So you might come in earlier for something with a committee or something with your staff or some meetings that you have, but you don't actually have to be on the floor until 6:30 that Monday or Tuesday fly-in day when you come in. And then you usually get to leave by midday on the Thursday or the Friday, again, what is referred to as fly-out day. When you're back in your district, in my case, at 24 cities and counties, you're trying to get all over the district and to be everywhere, every city and county that you can get to. So really, it was even more challenging your time back in your district if you're trying to be the best congressman you could be. And I certainly was trying to do that, because when I was in DC, I was kind of within about a 4-block radius just walking almost everywhere that I went, where in back home in the district in Central Virginia, I was trying to, again, get between 24 cities and counties. As far as I would often get asked, hey, where do you live? And what are your living arrangements? And, I didn't come to DC as a wealthy guy. I came blessed, and blessed compared to most people around the world and even most people in America. But I worked at a university. I worked at Liberty University in athletics administration. I wasn't a wealthy guy. And so I certainly was not going to try to maintain 2 residences. So I literally stayed in my office. A lot of members do that, particularly Republican members on the House side. I don't know what they do over in the Senate, but I stayed in my office. In DC, you get an office suite where the representative's office within that suite tends to have a small closet, or a large closet, I should say, and a half bath. I had a Murphy bed that was attached to the wall, and I would just work until late at night and open up that Murphy bed and crash there right in the office. And then I would get up at about 4 a.m. typically. I'd have my Bible study and prayer time first, then go down to the house gym by 5 a.m., finish a workout, be back up in the office by about 6:30. My staff didn't start to show up till sometime between 8 and 9. And of course, the goal was for it to not look like a dorm room by the time your staff showed back up in the office. So it was a very convenient way to live and to work. Not easy and not very fancy or very luxurious, but that's how I lived during my 4 years I was in DC. You have 3 different staff teams when you're a Congress member. You've got your political or campaign operation that you had coming into the position, and then you've got 2 staffs that are what are considered official or congressional staff. You've got a DC team and a district team. In my case, my DC team was, of course, my chief of staff, which is kind of your operations director, your right-hand person. And then you've got a legislative team, a communications team, and an operations team, which is scheduler, who coordinates your entire calendar, which is a very important position, closest thing to sort of a personal executive assistant. Then your district team are those who do casework and constituent services and are sort of the hands and the feet of Washington for your office and to your constituents, and who represent you all over the district. You have to keep things separate between what's called the official and the unofficial, official being the taxpayer-funded congressional operations, the DC team and the district office team. And then the unofficial or the campaign political operation has to be totally separate. There can't be any mixing between those. One of the challenges, though, is you're fundraising all the time. I don't think the founders ever imagined that when they imagined citizen legislators taking a turn, serving 2 years, taking turns with other citizens, that it would take so much money and so many resources to get elected and to stay elected in Washington. So that's a real challenge, having to fundraise all the time. You can't legally do any fundraising on Capitol property or congressional property or in official government buildings. You have to do those outside of government property. So there were places that I would go, particularly Conservative Partnership Institute, a few blocks away from the Capitol. That was a private entity that allowed members like myself who joined the Conservative Partnership Institute to work out of there and use some space there. And then you could go to the Capitol Hill Club, which is across the street, which is owned by members of the Republican Party, and do your fundraising interactions there. Some things that are just interesting that maybe most people don't know about as far as how Congress operates. You do have very little interaction with the other body, with the Senate. The Senate and the House are two separate bodies, bicameral bodies it's called, and you really don't work together or spend time together unless you deliberately, intentionally coordinate that or schedule that or do that on your own. But the two bodies don't really work together. The founders designed it that each would pass legislation and they would come together when the legislation was completed and resolve it between the two bodies for something to become law or not to become law. I will tell you that as a member of the House Freedom Caucus, more about that in a minute, but as a member of the House Freedom Caucus leadership team, we did have a standing regular meeting with a half dozen or so of the conservative senators. At one of the members would host that in his home, and we would have a meeting there on a regular basis on a weeknight during the weeks that we were in. Both bodies were in session, so that was very helpful for us to coordinate and strategize together. You also have very little meaningful interaction with the other party, so Republicans to Democrats. Republicans tend to work together, hang together in separate conference meetings from the Democrats. You meet separately within your committees prior to official committee hearings, where the minority group and the majority group are meeting separately, and you don't really have a lot of interaction unless you go and deliberately do it on your own or pursue it on your own. But just as a routine, being a member of Congress, you don't have a lot of meaningful interaction with the other party. Virginia was unique, though, among most states, represented there, of course, the 50 states, in that the Virginia delegation, meaning the 11 members of Congress and the 11 members of the House and the 2 senators, we would have a standing monthly meeting where we would have a luncheon meeting that was well attended. Most members came to that, where we would get together and have a cordial, collegial meeting where we would generally discuss things of agreement that were not particularly partisan, things about funding projects within the state, infrastructure type things. We would talk about, just non-controversial legislation, non-controversial issues, and share. And it was valuable and an interesting time together to get to know the members of the other side during those meetings and to spend some time with the senators. I will tell you there was one member, a little inside information, one member on the Republican side in the Virginia delegation who didn't come for the last a little bit over a year that I was there, and that was Jen Kiggans from Virginia Beach. Jen Kiggans and I were represented the opposite wings of the Republican Party. I was rated the most conservative member of the House during my 4 years, and she was one of the most liberal members of the Republican delegation, the Republican conference. And she betrayed my trust a little over a year before I left. She initiated a private floor discussion with me on the floor of the House, which she then almost immediately went and disclosed and distorted it to the media distorted what was said and distorted the tone, the tenor of the meeting, lied to me about going to the media about it. And of course, I read about it then an hour or two later after we spoke, where she tried to make it sound like she was tough and confronting me about something that she didn't confront me on. And when I expressed my displeasure to fellow members in the Virginia delegation and my intention to confront her at the next meeting, which was about the only time I typically would see her, that happened in, I think, August of 23. And then she never showed up to another Virginia delegation meeting until after I left in early 25. She avoided it because she didn't want to face me, for me to have an opportunity to confront her in that meeting for betraying that trust of a private conversation on the floor that she then went to the media about. So just an interesting thing that happened during my time. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about is there is a weekly standing bipartisan member prayer breakfast that happens in the ground floor of the Capitol building. It's attended by about 20 members on a regular basis, about 75% Republicans, about 25% of them are Democrats. And we alternate each week between someone sharing a testimony, something from the Bible, something about their faith or their family or their background, that kind of a thing. Alternates 1 week Republican, 1 week Democrat. I had the opportunity to share a couple of times, and I was kind of on a standby basis where whoever was coordinating that event knew that they could come to me at any time, and I was happy to share. I will tell you the Democrats seem to have a harder time finding members to share. They would often have to bring in members who didn't actually attend the bipartisan prayer breakfast on a regular basis, but they would come in to share. And it was always interesting to hear from both sides and to hear backgrounds like that and to learn more about your fellow members. I will just say on the Democrat side in Virginia, there were 2 members I particularly liked and enjoyed their company, being Don Beyer from Northern Virginia and Bobby Scott from down in the Hampton Roads area. Just great individuals who I enjoyed getting to know. We didn't agree on anything. We didn't cooperate on anything from a policy standpoint, but I enjoyed their company, appreciated how they treated me. So most of what I'm going to talk about here, unfortunately, falls under what you would expect, what's wrong with Washington. And I'm going to hit on the personnel side, the policy side, and then on the political side. So starting with personnel, sadly, most of Washington just wants to be in Washington. I can at least say that on the Republican side, meaning their priority by default is self-preservation and their selfish ambition. And everything else, sadly and unfortunately, is subordinate to that. It's sadly true, the infamous saying about if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. I think it was Harry Truman who said that famously. And then there's a quote from William Clay that said, "This is quite a game, politics. There are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends, only permanent interests." I'll say it again. This is quite a game, politics. There are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends, only permanent interests. And I certainly found that to be largely true. I would say on the Republican side, which is, of course, where I spent most of my time, out of the 220 Republicans that are there, they really fell into 3 different groups, all about a third or about 70, 75 members each. A third of the Republicans really don't want to do Republican stuff. They don't want to cut spending. They don't want to shrink government. They don't want to eliminate anything. They don't want to fight or stand on the moral issues that matter. So about a third of them, in my view, just really aren't Republicans, about 70, 75. Then there's another third who are sort of in the middle, another 70, 75, who they lean conservative and they like to do conservative stuff, but they don't want to take any risks and they want to do whatever's safest and in their best personal or political ambitions, meaning they whatever their aspirations are in terms of ascending into leadership and getting a better committee assignment or becoming a chairman or maybe running for a leadership position, conference chair, conference whip, majority leader, or speaker at some point, or they just want to be in good standing with the leadership. And so they won't risk anything. They might, again, want to do conservative things, but they don't want to risk anything or take any chances that jeopardize their own selfish political ambitions and interests. And then you have about a third of the Republicans, about 70, 75, that have some degree of courage and conviction, meaning they will stand on principle to some degree. They will show some courage and show some risk to buck the party, to stand up to party leadership. Now, let me put a little disclaimer on that or a caveat. During my 4 years, we were under Biden as president. So we didn't have President Trump. It's a whole different animal with who's willing to stand up to President Trump on the Republican side. So I'm speaking more in terms of within the House of Representatives. So again, you've got about a third that shows some courage and conviction. You got about a third that aren't really Republicans ideologically, in my view, in my experience. And then you got about a third in the middle who would like to do Republican stuff, but they won't take any chances or risks to do that. So that two-third, the bad two-third, the ones in the center and the ones on the left who aren't really Republicans ideologically, they outvote the conservative, principled, somewhat courageous one-third on everything, on personnel, on policy. Two-thirds of the Republicans there do whatever the leadership tells them to do, whatever the speaker and the majority leader tell them to do, meaning voting on the rules of the House and how Congress is going to function or how the party is going to function, elections for leadership positions and committee assignments and things like that, or just votes on the House floor. About two-thirds, their vote is in the pocket of leadership to do whatever leadership tells them to do. And that two-thirds, again, is not going to fight to cut spending, to reduce government, to eliminate departments and agencies and programs, or take any risks. Those two-thirds, by the way, wanted and voted for the return of earmarks in my first term. So my first term, I don't remember if it was late 21 or 22, Republicans had eliminated earmarks when they had control in like 2009, 2010, and Democrats voted to bring them back when they got the majority. And so we had a conference meeting, the Republican conference, when we were in the minority. There's about 215 of us. We were barely in the minority at that time, on whether or not Republicans were going to do earmarks because Democrats were doing earmarks. Now, earmarks are special port projects back in your district that's sort of bringing home the bacon, bringing home the money back to your district. And really, earmarks are used to buy votes for bad bills. In other words, hey, Bob, we want you to vote for this thing. So we're going to fund a library, or we're going to fund a new park and rec program. We're going to fund a new medical center. We're going to fund some kind of an infrastructure project back in your district. So we're going to help cover for you for these bad votes and these things that aren't popular in their district, where you're spending more money and you're not doing what you said you would do by bringing money back to your district. That's what earmarks are used for. And since that Republicans voted by two-thirds, again, the bad two-thirds voted for this to bring earmarks back, and now Republicans are in the majority, and they're still doing earmarks. My last year in Congress, you had thousands of earmarks for billions of dollars for Republicans and for Democrats. The majority gets more, but the minority party gets them too. I never did any earmarks, never took any earmarks during my 4 years, and very much against earmarks. But two-thirds of Republicans wanted to do earmarks. And what you find in D.C. is while very few Republicans are real true conservatives, again, about a third, at being generous there, they all play conservatives on TV. So when you see these members of Congress appearing on the conservative-leaning media and talking about things in D.C., they all sound like they're conservatives. They don't go and say, hey, I'm here to work with the Democrats. I'm here to compromise. I'm here to do earmarks. I'm here not to change anything. They sound like conservatives on TV, even though they're not really conservatives. But these counterfeits, these fakes, they hate the real thing that exposes them. They hate the real thing that exposes them. The House Freedom Caucus, of which I was privileged to be a member for all 4 years, exposes the phony counterfeit Republicans, and they hate us for it. They absolutely hate us for it. I would submit, in my experiences, there's two reasons you're not in the House Freedom Caucus if you're a Republican. And we had about 35 members out of the 220 or so Republicans. But you're not in the House Freedom Caucus because you're either not really a conservative or you're not courageous, meaning you pretend to be a conservative, but you're not really, or you are conservative and you like to do conservative things, but you're not really courageous and you don't want to be labeled or stigmatized or threatened as a result of being in the Freedom Caucus. Because when a freshman or, a candidate is running for Congress, many in the establishment, in the leadership, in the positions of influence within the Republican Party will tell them, hey, don't join the Freedom Caucus or you won't get good committee assignments. You won't get your bills passed into law. You won't have a chance to ascend into leadership. You won't get money from the party. You won't get fundraising help and support. And so, again, the two primary reasons I found that people aren't in the Freedom Caucus, they're either not conservative or they're not really courageous. Now, there were some exceptions, and really there were three, and I'll name them. I said in this podcast when we started, we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to name and shame. But the three exceptions that I found were limited. But Tim Burchett from Tennessee, Matt Gaetz from Florida, and Corey Mills from Florida. Those are about the only exceptions that I found. And again, I got asked a lot about, hey, do you respect, do you admire, do you trust? And I would say about 10% of Republicans fit that bill for me. And that's pretty sad out of 220 Republicans, but about 10% of them I would say were worthy of respect and admiration. The swamp is deep, the swamp is dark, the swamp is dirty, and it's pretty much undefeated. The swamp outlives any one president, any one congressional term, any individual congressional member, and it rarely loses. We did deal a strong blow against the swamp when we removed Kevin McCarthy from Speaker. When we did that in October of 23, I'm proud to have been part of that. Unfortunately, the swamp reacted, the swamp recovered, and they co-opted Mike Johnson, and he's become just like Kevin McCarthy, where his number one priority is to be Speaker, and he doesn't have anything to show for his now almost 2 years as the Speaker, and I'll speak more to that in a future podcast. But the way personnel works in D.C., courageous conservatives cannot ascend into leadership. We would often get asked during the speaker battles, hey, why don't you have an alternative? Why don't you have somebody else you're running? Why haven't you named who you'd like to be speaker, whether it was in January of 23 when we were first fighting through 15 rounds to prevent Kevin McCarthy from being speaker, or when we vacated the chair and removed Kevin McCarthy and had a competition. And prior to McCarthy being blocked or him being removed, why don't you name who you want to be speaker? And the reality was a couple of things. One, if you name someone as running against the existing leadership, that was going to ruin their chances to get elected, because that 2/3 of the party that is loyal to leadership would never vote for someone. So you had to keep your cards close to the vest, and you had to keep your powder dry until there was an actual opening to have a chance for someone to get elected. That would be better than who the swamp typically wanted. But courageous conservatives cannot ascend into leadership the way the Republican Party exists right now. During my 4 years, no conservative ever won a party election when they were running against a moderate or someone from that bad 2/3 of the conference. Only if it was like an uncontested minor position did you ever see a conservative win an election. And that's because the leadership of the Republican conference reflects the conference as a whole. And you got 2/3 are compromised, and so their leadership comes from that 2/3. And the conference, the Republicans at large, the 220 Republicans, they reflect the voters. And it really always comes back to the voters. It comes back to us. When will we demand change of those who represent us? We get the government we deserve. We don't like that. We like to blame government. We like to blame the elected officials, but we elected them. And we get the government we deserve. The government reflects us. A couple other observations about personnel. Lying isn't even a thing in DC. It's done without recognition, without apology, without remorse. It's a common thing. It's just what they do. I can honestly say I never lied in Washington. I never deceived anyone. I stand behind the things that I did and said, but that is a minority in Washington. Most of the elected representatives don't care about the Constitution, even on the Republican side. They don't care about the limits to the federal government that are expressed in the Constitution, the very limited powers given to the federal government, everything else left to the people in the states, according to the 10 Amendments, the Bill of Rights. And they almost look at you with like you have three heads when you talk about something being not constitutional or the limits of the federal government in the Constitution. Sadly, unfortunately, President Trump, as the leader of the Republican Party, is helping to preserve the swamp with the endorsements he gives. He almost always endorses the wrong person in any party election. When there's an open seat, he endorses a rhino, a moderate swamp-supported creature. Whenever we got a primary challenge of a rhino, he seems to endorse the rhino for reelection. He only seems to direct his wrath against conservatives like Thomas Massie, Chip Roy, Rand Paul, Ralph Norman, guys like that. So the president is not helping when it comes to personnel. Moving to policy, what's wrong with policy in Congress and how things work and how things operate? Well, policy is definitely a distant second to politics in Congress. And Congress is designed to prevent you from making a difference, to make it very difficult for you to make any change. I had a more senior member one time say to me, it's like sticking your hand in a bucket of water for a period of time, then pulling it out, and it looks like your hand was never stuck in there. It just goes back to how it was. That's how Washington is designed. That's how Congress is designed. A few things of note there. No work actually happens on the House floor. I didn't know that coming in. I didn't know you didn't really work on the floor or work in the Capitol building itself. No work really happens on the House floor. That's all for show. That's all for TV. Everything's decided by the time you get to the floor. Even the debates, so-called, that are happening, no one's listening to the people that are debating. The issue's already been decided. The votes are essentially already counted. There's no real work going on in committee hearings either. Those are almost empty rooms, except for those who are speaking. And no one's really listening when they're not the ones speaking. They're usually not even there. It's all for show. No legislation, no bills move onto the floor and into law without the support and the desire of leadership. So the majority, the speaker, the majority leader, in our case, Mike Johnson is the speaker, Steve Scalise is the majority leader. Nothing happens without their support, and the respective committee chairs have a lot of influence with respect to that. If it doesn't come through the committee of jurisdiction, or it's not supported by the committee of jurisdiction, which it's almost impossible to get it. If you're not on a particular committee, it's almost impossible to get that committee to support your legislation, and very difficult to get legislation considered on the floor without the support of leadership. They advance legislation and even steal legislation to advance or protect the rhinos, the moderates, the establishment types, meaning they block legislation or ignore legislation to diminish conservatives, the fighters. It doesn't matter how good legislation is. It doesn't matter with the merits of it. If you're not favored by leadership, they're just going to ignore your bill. I sponsored, dozens and dozens of bills every year, and they would just get ignored because I was a conservative fighter who was not in favor with leadership. And you'll hear criticism sometime about conservative fighters. Oh, they didn't get much, if any, bills passed into law. Well, that's because the leadership blocks them from passing legislation. If it's a good bill, they will literally give it to somebody else and put it under their name and bring it to the floor for a vote and just go around you. I knew that to happen several times while I was in Washington. Individual members, again, are almost irrelevant to getting legislation passed, no matter how good it is, no matter the merits of it. But that said, less is more in Washington. Most bills are either bad or unnecessary. Great example of that is a 1,000-page big ugly bill that's going to do tremendous harm and exacerbate the fiscal situation. These big CRs and these big omnibus, most of the bills that are passed are bad, or they're just unnecessary. And most bills are for political reasons, to enhance the desired or preferred members so they can get their name on stuff. So they'll bring bills to the floor just so some moderate rhino, some establishment loyal person in what's considered an at-risk district, a swing district, so they can get legislation passed with their name on it. And they don't do that for the conservative fighters. They don't do that for the principled members. They don't bring votes to the floor that will expose the moderates. Let's say you want to have a vote on life at conception or a heartbeat bill for life. They're not going to bring that to the floor for a vote because they don't want to expose the moderate rhinos. They're trying to protect them all the time. They don't care about protecting the conservatives. They'll bring bills to the floor that cause conservatives to have to take tough votes that compromise, that conflict with principles, like there's principled reasons to be for it and principled reasons against it, and they'll make conservatives take those tough votes, but they don't do that to the moderates. They're protecting them all the time. They call them the majority makers, the ones who are somehow, out of 220 Republicans, 20 or so of them in what are called swing districts are more important than the other 200 when everyone counts the same, of course. And for some reason, Republicans in leadership think we got to keep bad Republicans so we can continue to pursue bad Democrat policies. That circular reasoning. Again, if we don't keep these bad Republicans, then we can't keep doing Democrat things, and we can't keep operating like Democrats unless we keep these bad Republicans. It really is a vicious cycle. Another thing about policy, most bills pass on what's called suspension of the rules, where they'll waive the normal rules of legislation and the conditions under which bills are supposed to come to the floor, and they'll pass them in an empty chamber by what's called unanimous consent, where there might be one Republican, one Democrat in the chamber, and they'll just say, hey, by unanimous consent, we waive the rules and pass this by voice vote, all in favor, aye. One person says aye, nobody says opposed, and legislation comes into law. Most bills were literally passed that way. The Freedom Caucus fought against that during my 4 years, and we got concessions from leadership to limit that, and to require more roll call votes on the record, where members had to show you how they were voting and how they were supporting legislation. And most of the Republicans in the conference hated that we did that. They liked because they didn't have to take as many votes, and it was faster and easier and took less time. But the Freedom Caucus fought against that. When you're in Washington, you are running so fast. You're going from meeting to meeting and committee hearing to committee hearing and floor vote to floor vote. And you are just running so fast. You are really dependent on your staff to help you, to inform you. And very few members can actually read the legislation because the bills are so long. They are thousands of pages in some cases. They're written in a way that's difficult to understand. And it's easy to then deceive and distort about what's in the bill because they're big and they're complicated to make a bad bill sound good or a good bill sound bad. The Freedom Caucus fought during my time and won some concessions to have a limited amount of time to read legislation, that what we call the 72-hour rule, that you had to have at least 3 days to read a bill before you'd be required to vote on it. That we reduced, again, those bills getting passed under what's called suspension of the rules. We fought to have single issue bills instead of putting a bunch of bills together on issues that weren't related. But the problem is Congress can waive whatever rules they want to. So those are the rules, but the Speaker Johnson would waive them all the time. Matter of fact, they're waiving those. They waived those with the big ugly bill. They waived the minimum amount of time to read the legislation in order to try to pass it in a rush. It's always all about the money in Washington when it comes to policy. Nothing changed without things being funded or defunded. So it's all about the money. But no Congress can bind a future Congress. So the only thing that matters is what Congress is passing that impacts this Congress this time right now. Because when they try to pass stuff for a future Congress can just come and waive those, change those rules, eliminate those things. So if you have spending cuts that are supposed to go into effect in the future Congress just eliminates those spending cuts. Congress can do whatever it wants. It's a cop-out when Congress says they can't do something, because Congress makes the laws. The highest laws of the land, the highest legislative body in the land is Congress. The only thing they can't do legally is to violate the Constitution. But Congress sets the rules of the House, and Congress can do whatever they want to change those rules with a simple majority vote. The Freedom Caucus is the best hope for Congress in many ways, particularly when it comes to the policies. The Freedom Caucus has fought hard to make things better or less worse, and to make legislation better by fighting for some spending cuts, some reforms on how Congress works. But it is an uphill climb. It is a massive battle because they are in the minority. It's all about power and leverage in D.C. It's only what you can force to change. It's when you express your concerns, your reservations about something, it's just noise. And unless you have some kind of leverage point or some kind of power to force something, which means unless you're willing to vote no, they don't care about your concerns. They don't care about your reservations. They don't care about what you think. If you're not willing to vote no, if you don't have the courage to buck the party, to buck the president, to stand up when you think it's important on principle, then it doesn't matter what you think. Things that you hear all the time in Washington when it comes to policy, just be a team player. Be a team player. That means obey leadership, obey the party, support the moderates, support the rhinos, do what the swamp and the system want you to do. Be unified is another way to say it. Unified no matter what we do. Unified irrespective of the merits or the good or the bad or the harm that's being done. Just stick together and do what the swamp wants or what the system wants. You'll hear establishment, longtime members saying, hey, we deal in the possible, not in the idealistic thing. We deal in the possible. I can remember one time when I was in a conference meeting, again, the 220 or so Republicans, and challenging something, and having one of the longtime members of Congress get up from the state of Oklahoma, and he said, I've been here 30 years, and what we're doing is working, and you don't know how things work here, and you're trying to change things. You need to listen to how we... And I said, by what standard of measurement or by what definition could you say anything here in Washington is working? And you said, I've been here 30 years, like that was a good thing. You don't even recognize that you're part of the problem. That's the mindset in Washington. And as far as policy in the Republican conference, it's always next time. Next time we're going to fight. Next time we're going to stand strong. Next time we're going to make a difference. But of course, next time never gets there. Now to the political side for a moment. We talked a little bit about personnel, how things are, about policy. The Republican conference, again, the 220 so Republicans, has a weekly standing meeting. Usually it's on Tuesday or Wednesdays mornings at 9 o'clock. And about half of those are what they call political meetings. They got to be held across the street in the Capitol Hill Club. They can't be held in official congressional buildings or in the Capitol complex. And during these meetings are all about the politics and the campaigns and fundraising and those sorts of things. They're really run by the NRCC team, the National Republican Congressional Committee. That's the fundraising arm for the Republican House. And they literally have what they call an altar call every meeting. It's so sacrilegious, they call it an altar call, where members take turns going to the mic in the meeting and pledging how much money they've raised, or announcing how much money they've raised and donated to the party. And it'll be 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, 50,000, sometimes $1 million. And the purposes of that is the more money that you raise for the party, the better committee assignments you get, the better opportunity you have to rise into leadership. And so they are literally buying their seats, they're buying their political aspirations, they're ascending into positions of leadership. How do you get the committee that you want? There's more desirable or more influential committees. How do you get on the Ways and Means Committee that determines how we tax the American people, or the Appropriations Committee, how we spend money, or Energy and Commerce, or Armed Services, or Financial Services, where the money flows from the lobbyists, the special interests, and the big donor classes? How do you get those desirable committees? How do you ascend into leadership and become a chairman, or run for, have a successful run for, speaker or majority leader or a whip or a conference chair? You got to raise money for the party. You got to be a reliable yes vote for the party, meaning you do what leadership tells you to do. And you operate as an establishment moderate rhino. That's how you become a leader in the Republican conference. It's not based on merit. It's not based on competence. It's not based on experience. It's not based on qualifications. They don't care about any of that. And matter of fact, the 20 or so chairmen in the Republican conference, you could argue, most of them are among the worst Republicans in the Republican conference. So the 20 or so chairmen, most of those are moderates. Most of those are compromised rhinos, and among the worst members of the Republican conference. That's something that's why I was so proud to be elected as chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Those 35 or so members elected me over my peers overwhelmingly after I had been there for 3 years. One of the, if not the earliest, one of the earliest or youngest in terms of political tenure members to be elected to the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Very proud of that, because the members actually elected me. And your committees that you're assigned to, and I was on the Ed and Workforce Committee and on the Budget Committee, you don't get to vote on your chairman or your leadership. That's decided by the party. That's something a lot of people don't know. The committee members don't vote on the committee chairman. The party chooses that, again, based on how much money you raise for the party, whether you're a loyal team player that does what the party tells you to do, and whether or not you're more moderate, more establishment oriented. It's all the politics of it, the Republican conference in D.C. It's all about preserving the majority. The majority is all that matters. It's not about what you do with the majority or what you fight for or what your principles are. It's just about having the majority and being in the majority. A few other notes about things outside of the actual Congress. The conservative groups in Washington that you hear so much about, and I won't name them, but the ones who are supposedly fighting or standing for these particular issue concerns, most of them are really fundraising frauds. Their priority is access and preservation of their organization, access to leadership, access to power, and preserving the organization. Their loyalty is to the Republican Party's leadership team. They don't seem sometimes to want to really fix the issues that keep them relevant, because then they wouldn't have a reason to exist or to fundraise anymore. And they tend to provide political cover for party leadership and for the rhinos, meaning they'll score a bill or won't score a bill in a way that will help give political cover to the moderate rhinos. They're not generally there to help the conservatives. Even conservative, so-called conservative media, Most of them want access to leadership, access to power. And the same so-called conservative media that attacks Congress for not fighting, for not taking a stand, for not taking risks, then they're the first ones to go and attack and to criticize and condemn when you have courageous conservatives fighting for things within the Republican Party. We faced that during the speaker fight to try to prevent Kevin McCarthy from becoming speaker in January of 23. And again, when we removed Kevin McCarthy as speaker in October of 23, it was the knives in our back were coming from so-called conservative media pundits who were criticizing us for doing the kind of things they call for because they tend to be loyal to and supportive of leadership. So the swamp is called a swamp for a reason. Again, it's dirty, it's dark, it's deep, and the swamp usually wins. But all that said, we are still a government of the people, by the people, for the people. If we choose to participate, I think it was Thomas Jefferson said, we're not a government of the majority, we're a government of the majority that participates. So we've got to participate, we've got to educate ourselves and others. We've got to engage and be willing to mix it up. We've got to hold our elected officials accountable. That is our responsibility in keeping the republic that we've been entrusted with. Serving in Congress was the greatest privilege of my professional life. I have no regrets. I would do it all over again. I don't regret any of my actions or my votes or the stances I took in Washington. I was an imperfect vessel, but I can say I worked hard on the things I said I would work and fight for, our border and immigration reform, cutting spending and reducing government, fighting for our constitutional freedoms. And it was a great privilege and a high honor that I would do all over again if I could go back in time. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the Good for America podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. I want to ask you again to subscribe to the podcast, to follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good, to rate this show and to share it with your friends. Thank you, and let's keep the republic.